Today on this episode of The Crossover, we will be discussing the best-selling book, Peak Mind. Find your focus, own your attention, invest 12 minutes per day with world-recognized neuroscience expert, Dr. Amishi Jha. Find out how you can reduce stress, increase mental focus, and maximize your human potential. Much more on this episode of The Crossover. Good afternoon, everyone. Going to be talking with Dr. Amishi Jha today about her amazing new book. Here she is. Let me pull her on. Hope you're having a good day. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, just while everyone's logging on, I'm going to do a brief introduction for those people who may not know you. We are very lucky to speak with Dr. Jha today. She's a world-recognized leader in neuroscience. Not only a best-selling author, but also director of Contemplative Neuroscience here at the University of Miami and professor of psychology. Previously, she was at the Center for Cognitive Neuroscience at the University of Pennsylvania. She received her undergraduate degree at the University of Michigan, doctorate from UC Davis, and then postdoc at Duke. She's been awarded several grants from the Department of Defense and several private foundations, leading research on the neural basis of attention and the effects of mindfulness-based training, programs on cognition, emotion, resilience, and performance. In her current lab, she uses functional MRI, electrophys recordings, and behavioral analysis to understand why our attention sometimes fails, and can it be trained for greater focus and less distractions. She launched the first ever study to offer mindfulness training tools to active duty military service members as they prepared for deployment. What she's discovered is that without intervention, attention is often compromised and attentional lapses can increase. Yet with mindfulness training, attention can be strengthened and then protected. Her work, which is groundbreaking, has been featured on TED.com, NPR, and Mindful Magazine. In addition, and actually most impressive, she's presented her work to NATO, the UK Parliament, the Pentagon, and at the World Economic Forum. So certainly impressive to say the least. Here today to discuss her new book, which, as I said, was released just a few months ago, Peak Mind. Find your focus, own your attention, invest 12 minutes a day, and she shares how we can really train our attention and optimize our performance. So again, Dr. Jha, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Awesome. So we'll just start with the basics, just for people who don't have any background. Let's start. What exactly is attention? Like, people use that word frequently, but what does it mean what is the human being's attention?
Yeah, I mean, in the broadest sense, it is the ability to prioritize some information over other information. And it really resulted from a big problem that the brain suffered from over the course of human evolution, which is that there's far more stuff out there in the world and even generated within our minds than the brain could possibly fully process. So this prioritizing approach was a great way to try to subsample what's going on. And we can prioritize in many ways. I mean, the kind of common way we think about attention is focus. But essentially what we're meaning there is that we're prioritizing some content over other content. So right now, this conversation and talking to you is my focus, not reading an email or seeing what's on my, what text messages are coming in. But there's other ways we can prioritize as well. And another way we prioritize has to do with not so much about the content, but about the moment. So what is happening and what is most relevant right now? And we use this function, something sometimes called alerting or being alert, when we're driving, walking, for example, you see in a school zone, you see a flashing yellow light, or near a construction site maybe. You're broad, receptive, you've got to be attentive to what's happening in the moment, but you're not privileging some content over other content. In fact, it would be a bad idea to privilege because you don't know what it's going to be that you're going to need to take a quick turn of action on. So content we prioritize, moment we prioritize, and then the third thing is goals. We prioritize everything we do and how we perceive and act based on what is most important for us to do in the moment and what we hold as the most important goal. So that kind of broadens our understanding of what attention is. It's not simply focus. It's these other ways that we make some information more important than others.
Now, what was your inspiration to write this book, right? People could say, well, we understand attention,
Yeah.
Right? Which we really don't. But tell us, what was your inspiration to put this book together?
I mean, as you know, in science, it's always an evolving journey. We're learning, but we're also very aware of how little we know. So with attention, it's the same idea. And my motivation for writing the book was really that I felt that we were at the point in the work that we've been doing in my lab with various populations, and you described some of them, for example, military service members or medical and nursing professionals, first responders, elite athletes, people for whom attention matters in terms of their performance. And when there are lapses, even small lapses, and you know better than anyone as a neurosurgeon, you cannot lapse because the consequences could be deadly for, in some cases, you know, in the context of service members, for themselves or others. And then, you know, in the medical context, it's very obvious how we don't want to lapse. So I became very interested in being able to take what we had learned from the lab and really make it available to everybody, because I felt like we were triangulating on solutions that were practical and frankly that were relevant for all of us. Even if everything we do, I know as a professor at a university, you know, whether my attention lapses or not may not be life or death in the context of, you know, reading a journal article or grading exams, but for all of us, it matters to us what we do in our lives and how we perform. So that was really the inspiration, this notion that you can cultivate a peak mind, which is not really about always having success or the best or ultimate moment, but about being able to fully harness these mental resources of attention so we can live the most fulfilling and, I would say, engaged lives that we possibly can.
So let's get really granular. So for example, you just mentioned, you know, obviously I'm paying super close attention when I'm doing brain surgery and zero attention when I'm brushing my teeth, let's say, because you're on cruise control at that point. How does the mind gauge when to pay attention, how to pay attention, and how to get laser focus?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is based on the demands. You know that when you're in the middle of surgery, it's consequential. You can upregulate what we call cognitive control so that you are laser focused. You're devoting all of it. But the reality is that even under those circumstances, there are micro excursions away from the task at hand. That's just the reality of how the mind works. And then when you're brushing your teeth or something really not consequential, there's no reason to have ultimate control over where your mind is. Though it's not that attention disappeared, it's just that it probably went to something not tied to the act of brushing your teeth. So you're thinking about your day, or what you might have for breakfast, or whatever it is that might come to mind. Attention's still active. It's just not on the thing you're doing in the moment. And that's what we're learning is key. You know, how can we align what we're doing and where our attention is better when we want it to be there? And how can we become more aware of when lapses occur so that we can get back on track when we need to? And that is not as trivial as it may even seem. You know, it's not simply a matter of like, oh, wow, look at that. I'm not paying attention. I should get back. Typically, we have no idea where our mind is. I mean, most of the time we have no idea where our mind is. In terms of getting our mind to be where we want it to be, it's a continuous, ongoing effort. And I sometimes refer to it as it's more like, more than anything else, I would say it's like dribbling a basketball. It's an active process. And if you don't keep dribbling, the ball is just going to roll away. You've got to keep checking in with the ball. You've got to have a certain amount of monitoring of where the ball is. And if you don't, you're not going to succeed in dribbling the ball to where you want it to go.
Now, how much is conscious, meaning like your decision, I'm going to focus on this. I need to grade these term papers,
yeah,
versus instinctual. There's a fire alarm. Someone honks the horn.
Yeah.
Something that grabs your attention.
So let's even talk about that first. You know, I talked about sort of these three ways of paying attention. The first one tied to what we call focus. And the metaphor I often use for that, it's formally called the brain's orienting system, where we decide to devote our attention. And the metaphor I use is, it's like a flashlight or a torch, depending on the part of the country or world you live in. And you can direct it willfully. We know that. It is possible for us to do this. And we can even get laser focused. So it can be a little bit broader or really narrow. So I'm sure that, you know, again, in the context of surgery, there are times when you've got to be broad and receptive. So like what's going on in the global climate of, you know, in this particular operating theater versus I need to know exactly for this particular location, what's going on. So we can definitely have both control over where it is and even the aperture, if you will, of that flashlight. But that flashlight can get yanked. And the things that yank the flashlight are essentially things that are baked into us and have privileged our survival over many, many, many thousands of years. So things that, as you already mentioned, alarming, things that are actually tied to our survival, a loud sound, something salient, something self-related, threatening circumstances. And when those kinds of things occur, we get yanked away. And, by the way, now it's not just that they're actually threatening or salient for useful reasons. It could be a text message on a group chat. It has nothing to do with really survival or something, but that notification and that alert will activate that same brain process that says, pay attention to what's going on over there. And we've got to be aware of that, which I think is part of the reasons many of us feel like our attention is in crisis. Because though we have every intention of focusing, it feels like the flashlight gets yanked around way more than we want.
Now, how do we avoid, I mean, obviously we can't avoid when there's something so emergent, like you said, something that's so primitive in our mind. If there's a loud sound, an alarm, a honk, a car accident, you obviously can't maintain focus in that situation. But how do we avoid looking ahead, right? Like everyone talks about living in the moment, focusing on what you're doing, not focused on what's going to happen in the future, which is a common mistake. What's your advice to people to avoid that looking ahead and kind of missing the moment?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, I don't see any problem with looking ahead. I think that this feature of mental time travel is so powerful for us to be able to plan ahead. And it's actually what makes us uniquely human, to do this thing that allows us to fast forward the mind to the next moment. I mean, you've got to do that even in the micro sense, right? So if this is happening right now, what are 2 or 3 steps ahead that you're going to need to do? You're kind of setting that up to be able to do that. If you couldn't look ahead, that kind of planful and fluid integration of the present moment into the next would be compromised. We can also rewind. We don't have to just fast forward. We can rewind. And that's also very productive to learn from our past experiences. But you're absolutely right. There is a lot of value in keeping that, as I say, button right on play, not fast forwarding or rewinding, but keeping the button on play. And part of it is because when we do look ahead or look back, we're not often doing it productively. We're not simply planning ahead strategically, mapping out the route. We're catastrophizing or worrying about events, and we're making up stories about what might happen with no idea of whether that's the case or not. Or when we're rewinding the mind, we're not productively reflecting on past experiences, but we're stuck there. We're ruminating on things over and over again. So, I would say that the way in which to do it is not a simple answer. It's not simply saying, well, just pay attention to the moment. I mean, we can certainly say that to ourselves over and over again, but it's a very strong default to rewind and fast forward. In fact, it looks like something like 50% of our waking moments, our mind is wandering away from the present moment. So the solution that I suggest, and that we found research in my lab supports this way of going about it, is to train the mind. And the way we do that is by using tools that have been around for, frankly, thousands of years, something called mindfulness meditation training. And what these practices, and it's a brain training practices essentially, allow us to do is exercise having the mind in the present moment. And there's a whole suite of ways we can do that.
Yeah, I mean, and we're going to get into that in just in one second, but I wanted to get into, people probably think, well, this is not a big problem, right? Lack of attention, focus, but obviously, best. How common in the overall population is the inability to focus, and especially nowadays with the world we live in, that is so volatile, so much instability, so much going on with the pandemic and possible world wars and economic stuff going on. How common is the inability to focus currently in the general population?
I mean, what we've learned is that under high stress, high demand circumstances, and I would say a global pandemic certainly satisfies that, but frankly, the academic semester satisfies that. Preparing for a sales season satisfies that. Anytime that there is demand and it's ongoing for multiple weeks, we're in a vulnerable situation when it comes to our attention. And we've found that number, 50% of the time our attention is not on the task at hand, it goes up. So now we're really not there most of the time, which is extremely problematic because the demands have to be dealt with in the moment. And so if you're lost in thought regarding what possible scenario may occur, you're not getting the data regarding what is occurring so you can best resolve or address what's occurring right now. So it is very real. And, we've tried all of these different approaches just through laboratory metrics, like tell people, pay attention, doesn't work. Motivate them with money in the lab, have them come in and say, we'll pay you extra if you don't mind wander. They mind wander anyway. It's a very strong pull, and under high stress, even stronger. In addition to everything we just talked about, all I said right now with this 50% plus number is the internal chatter that can pull us away. Add to that all of the external demands that are pulling our attention. It's a very serious circumstance for us right now, and we feel it. I've gone to so many different groups and talked to them about it, and I've never had anybody raise their hand and say, my attention is awesome. I don't need any help with my attention. It feels like the most precious resource that's very, very fragile right now. And it kind of shows up as this kind of malaise or mental fog that we're all in, instead of having access to sort of crisp and clear thinking. And that matters. That matters to the quality of our lives, the quality of our thinking, and the quality of our relationships. So doing something about it should be on our minds. And, the dilemma has been, what do you tell people to do? So just like with the body, if we know that physical exercise is good for the body, we now know what to tell people to do. 30 minutes of cardiovascular exertion for 5 days a week, something like that. That prescription was not available for the mind, and certainly not for attention, but that's what we're triangulating on with mindfulness training. And we're trying to get the prescription to offer people.
So let's first talk about what causes people to be distracted. And you talk about the 3 different kryptonites: stress, negative mood, and threats.
Yeah.
Just kind of go into each of those briefly, how those pull people away from the moment.
Yeah, and in some sense, they share the same features we already addressed, whether it's stress, which essentially is distress, this feeling of overwhelm, that the demands on me outpace my capacity to meet those demands successfully. And, there is a type of stress that doesn't produce that feeling of overwhelm. And that we'd say is eustress, or activating stress, positive stress. But when we dip into distress, the same features show up. We mind wander more. We're hijacked away in time. We're not in the present moment. It tends to cascade into those other things of poor mood and even feeling attacked or threatened. When we talk about poor mood, same idea. Mentally time traveling away, stuck in rumination or catastrophizing about the future. And then when it comes to threat, it really is that it's not so much just about threat regarding our physical safety, and certainly during the pandemic, our health has been a huge source of worry about that and feeling under threat. But even psychosocial threat, this notion of evaluation from other people, or our sense of justice and what's important to us, all of those, when under threat, compromise attention. And part of it is that they hijack us away. They take up our mental bandwidth, if you will. And when that occurs, it's sort of this kind of downward spiral where the events themselves can occupy attention. And then there's less and less available for us to use in the present moment, which further makes us vulnerable to more chances of stress, threat, and negative mood crippling us further. So we've got to figure out a way to kind of break out of that cycle. And, we tried this in some of the most demanding circumstances where people were really very much under physical threat, and under conditions that would lead to negative mood. And they were certainly stressful. And we were able to successfully train them to protect against that. So I feel very hopeful that though it seems dire, our stolen focus is not something we can't steal back, but it will take training.
Now, we all know people who just inherently have the ability to focus, right? College, medical school, people who could just spend 8 hours looking at a book, never moving, memorize everything, laser focus. Other people who, after 5 minutes, need to get up, get something to eat, can't really focus. How much of attention is innate and you're born with it versus being able to train yourself?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is both are true. That there are individual differences in our attention, and some people will be able to stay focused for longer than other people. And all of the people that we've worked with, regardless of their initial set point, have 2 features in common. Regardless of how brilliant they may be with regard to their attention under normal circumstances, even they will be vulnerable under high stress circumstances. And even they, with their fantastic attention, can be trained to improve beyond the set point. So it's not, and we were really concerned about this. We were working with, conventional military forces, and we found that they were vulnerable under pre-deployment training and readiness training. And we thought, let's work with elite warriors. Let's work with special operations. Maybe they won't show that vulnerability. And actually they didn't under pre-deployment conditions, whereas most soldiers were showing a degradation in attention and an increase in negative mood. Special ops that were selected for being able to be peak in their attention and emotion regulation didn't show that degradation. When we offered them mindfulness training, though, they increased above their baseline. So though they were excellent and less vulnerable, they were able to improve. And that was the kind of edge that everybody's looking for, is how do I make myself better armored against the kind of consequences of very demanding circumstances. But there's one other thing I wanted to tell you, which is that it may seem like people have unflinching focus. They can sit in front of, they crack open the book and just study for hours. They too are not doing it, sort of continuously. There is constantly a pull away. And the thing that it seems differentiates people that are successful at paying attention versus those that are not is the return back to the focused task. And that requires knowing where you are. So if you didn't have it like sort of an internal GPS that said, where am I right now relative to my goal? There's no way you're going to make it back. And it looks to be the case that that internal knowledge of where your attention is stronger in people that show up as having more successful and better focus, more successful attention and better focus.
So let's get into your mindfulness training, which I find fascinating. And obviously this is applicable to anyone listening right now. What exactly is your mindfulness training exercise? How does it work? Give us some details.
Yeah, I mean, it's not one exercise. That's the first thing. It's just like, physical fitness. There's a cross-training kind of a perspective. And it's not mine. That's the other thing I want to say. This is part of the world's wisdom traditions. I didn't invent mindfulness meditation. It's been around for thousands of years. The thing that we did do, though, is bring it into the kinds of settings that probably, and actually for sure, I know some of them, it's never been tried before. As you mentioned, when you provided that nice intro, we were the first group that actually offered mindfulness training to pre-deployment soldiers. So there's many wisdom traditions around the world where it's part of the culture, it's part of the spiritual and religious practices. But to bring it into the workplace setting, especially for groups that are not gravitating toward it on their own, it's a new thing. And so that's where the science and that's where the innovation has happened. And my interest was not so much in simply bringing the practices, but really making them time efficient. Because of course, if I say, you want better attention, go take go on a month-long meditation retreat. Meditate for like 10 to 12 hours a day, be out in nature, and I guarantee your attention will be better. Probably most of us would say, yeah, that sounds like a great thing to do. And very few of us could sign up to do that. So the approach that we took in the research grant was, let's find the minimum effective dose. What is the shortest amount of time that people can do daily to find beneficial effects for those three main systems of attention? This orienting ability, or the flashlight as I call it, alerting, or the focus, and then something called executive control, which is really regarding goal-focused behavior. And what we came to is that there's about 4 practices that all tap into those same brain systems. And when people do those, when they get trained to do those over about 4 weeks and practice about 12 minutes a day, their attention is protected, and in many cases, even strengthened beyond simply staying stable over high stress intervals, strengthened beyond the baseline, like those special forces soldiers I was mentioning.
So tell us a little bit how those 12 minutes look, because I think anyone listening, if they have the opportunity to improve their attention and focus in just 12 minutes a day, they're obviously gonna do that. Just tell us a little bit what those 12 minutes look like.
Yeah. And it's funny. It's when we describe this to some of our military colleagues, they say, oh, you're giving us a mental push-up, which I love. I love that metaphor because it's true. What we do, and it's very simple, we use a handy target for our attention, if you will, something that's with us all the time. You and I have been engaging in this target this entire time we've been talking, as is everyone that's listening to our voices. Our breath. Our breath is with us all the time. You don't need any special props to focus on your breath. And it's not something you need to control for it to occur. In fact, if we did, we'd probably not be alive because it would take too much attention to do that. So the breath is just happening on its own. What we do in a kind of one of the foundational practices, something I call the find your flashlight practice. And I call that on purpose because, like I said, the key is knowing where your attention is. What we do in that practice is that we commit to however long, and I wouldn't recommend that you start at 12 minutes. Maybe start at a minute, 2 minutes, and work up to 12 minutes. But what you're going to do for that minute or 2 minutes is find a supportive place and take a kind of posture, a sitting posture that is really taking this intentional task seriously. So what you do is you can sit quietly, lower or close your eyes. And usually we do that to just limit visual distraction. And then focus your attention, take that flashlight of attention and point it toward breath-related sensations. And be specific. So you're getting as granular as possible. Is it the sensations around the nose of the air coming in and out, or maybe your chest moving up and down? Whatever it is for you that is prominent tied to the breath, that's where you're going to hold that flashlight of attention. So that's step one, and that's engaging this orienting system of attention. Step two is take a broad receptive stance. Notice where the mind is. If it's wandered away from that breath-related sensation, in that moment, all you need to do is take that flashlight and redirect it back. So it's essentially sort of a three-step process, as I was saying, this push-up. It's focusing, pointing it toward breath-related sensations, noticing when mind wandering away from that has occurred, and then redirecting back. And when we repeat this, not only are we taking seriously training our attention, but we are exercising all of these systems of attention to strengthen them, improve their coordination, and then not just be excellent breath followers. Who cares? We're doing this so that with this kind of workout, we can use focus, notice, redirect with almost any single thing we do, whether it's having a conversation with somebody, reading a piece of, reading a news article or a research paper, whatever it is, you can use that strengthened capacity for better focus.
Now you're talking about focusing on one solitary component, right? Breathing.
Yeah.
But many people would bring up the question of multitasking, which is so important in this day and age. I would say that anyone who's successful, or actually many people who are successful, have the ability to multitask, do multiple things simultaneously and at a very high level. How does your training and your theory integrate with multitasking?
Well, I would push back strongly on this one. So multitasking is actually not a thing. We don't multitask. If something is attentionally demanding, we cannot do multiple things that are attentionally demanding simultaneously. So it feels like we are, like, oh, I got multiple things going on. But what we're actually doing is task switching. So notice I didn't say, flashlights of attention. I said a flashlight. And, I always like to think about the brain in some sense. And, you tell me if this metaphor, how it relates to your understanding. But it's sort of like if you had a studio apartment and everything in the brain, when you have a particular task, kind of reconfigures the furniture and the layout of that studio apartment to do it. That's what we call prioritizing mental processes in the service of a particular task. So in some sense, when we multitask, we're configuring the furniture, let's say, to make sandwiches, because that's a big thing we got to do. And then we got to do our taxes. So we got to put away all the food and then kind of reconfigure the thing to be able to take out our paperwork and do that. That's what is happening with task switching. We're reconfiguring the brain over and over again. We're engaging and then we're disengaging, and we're moving and then we're disengaging. It's exhausting, frankly, to do that for the mind. So though it may feel like the best approach to be successful, I really, part of my mission is to promote a culture change that says, do not disadvantage your brain. It's the best way to deplete this precious attentional resource is to force a multitasking context. So as much as possible, monotask instead of multitask. When you can. Now, obviously, as a physician, you can't just simply ignore the beep of your phone if a patient needs you, et cetera. There's got to be responsivity. But when you do need to do deep work, take the opportunity to do that. Don't leave all your notifications open if they're not required. Close all the extra windows on your computer screen. Tell people you're going to be involved in some deep work, and then take that time, because a lot more will get done and you'll have more capacity remaining after that period of time than you would have otherwise.
So interesting. And I think the point you bring up is that multitasking doesn't really exist, but we all know people who during the course of a day can get way more done than other people because they're able to switch quicker, switch more effectively. It doesn't take them time to ramp up. They can instantly be laser focused on something and then switch to something else and focus on that. Is that also innate, or is that also part of the mindfulness training?
In some sense, it's tied to mindfulness training in that the floodlight function, right? The kind of broad receptive stance is being in a readied state so you can take action. So if that floodlight is being cultivated so that there's more what we call situational awareness, then when your action is needed, you can intervene very successfully. If you don't know what's going on around you, your chances of being able to pivot and take action is going to be less. But it's not so much, I would say, the switching that does it. It's the not having the lingering effects of the prior task on the current task. So it's pivoting fully, not sort of half engaged in the last task and as you go into the new one. And we know this, right? So, I mean, I've experienced it not in being a physician, but certainly engaging with them. If they're still thinking about the last patient when they're talking to me, when my physician is talking to me, I feel that. I feel that they're not fully on me as the center of their attention. And really successful and skilled physicians and medical care providers, you feel that they have fully pivoted so that the full focus of their mind is on the current moment and on the current patient. So I think that it's more than just being able to switch, it's the nature and quality of the attention you bring once you have switched.
Yeah, that is 100% true. I mean, you really hit the nail on the head. Absolutely. Sometimes it can be very difficult if there's a critically ill patient to switch your attention until the task at hand is fully, complete.
Resolved. Yeah.
Absolutely. Very difficult to do. Let's talk a little bit about ADHD, which it seems like it's increased in terms of overall incidence, especially when you talk about children. One, what are your thoughts on the increasing incidence of ADHD? And two, do you feel like we're over medicating children? Should these kids, rather than getting medication, be engaging in your mindfulness training?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I'm not a clinician. So, I mean, whether there's more prescriptions that should be sent out, I have no idea. I'll stay agnostic on that point. But what I would say is that we do have now alternate tools that we can make available. Most of my work, in fact, all of my work over the last couple of decades has been with adults. But there's a growing interest and a growing effort to bring mindfulness practices to children, including children that are dealing with attentional challenges. So the key, though, with doing that is that we don't want to introduce it in the same way we would to people that don't have attentional challenges. So we did a project with adults with ADD, and whereas I would say to our kind of other participants that don't have attentional challenges, begin, once we start training you on the practices, start with your 12 minutes a day once you're ramped up to do that. With the adults with ADD, we didn't do 12 minutes of practice till week 8 of the program. And what we did is also not require them to sit quietly by themselves with their eyes closed. We had very active practices. Go for a walk, feel the sensations of the air on your skin, your feet touching the ground. So we can offer these in ways that are more amenable to being, doable for people and more in line with what their capabilities already allow. But the key thing that we found with that study and with other studies that have been done with people with ADD is that the quality that gets cultivated that is the most helpful is that same one that we've been talking about, finding your flashlight, knowing where you are in the moment. And I really do think of it as sort of this internal GPS, like, where am I right now? How do I know if I'm lost or not if I don't even know where I'm trying to go? So bringing to mind what the goal is of the moment and bringing to mind where you are relative to that goal so that you can change course if it's needed. Those are things that can be cultivated for all of us, whether we've got attentional challenges or not. It's just the route by which we cultivate them may be different.
So interesting. Just trying to wrap things up, give us your crystal ball view on what the future of mindfulness looks like. What major breakthroughs do you see happening in the next 5, 10, 15 years?
It's such a great question. My hope is that in the same way that we now know and take it for granted that physical exercise is needed for physical health, what my work and the work of many other contemplative neuroscientists will do is make this cultural understanding that the mind, just like the body, needs training daily for optimum functioning, that it'll become a cultural norm. And that in the same way, it may not seem weird to us to sit on a bike, pedal really hard and get nowhere. But 200 years ago, people would have thought that's absolutely crazy to do. We will start understanding that doing something as potentially odd looking as closing your eyes and focusing on your breath 12 minutes a day is a very powerful thing you can do to favor your health and wellness. So what I'm interested in seeing is more receptivity and more opportunities where we can normalize this so that in, for example, even meetings where teams come together, medical teams, for example, collective mindfulness, a moment to arrive, for example, before the meeting even begins, for everybody to be aware that the minds of all of us will wander and to support each other to bring them back on track. This is the kind of cultural change that I'm very interested in seeing, and that's what we're working toward right now to promote.
Absolutely fascinating. Again, I'm going to wrap it up because I know how busy you are. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Jha. 12 minutes a day, obviously worth the investment for everyone listening. Definitely get the book, Peak Mind. Absolutely great news. Again, thanks for your time, Amishi. Have a wonderful weekend. And for all our listeners, this episode and the rest will be streaming on the crossover. So thanks again for your time. Fascinating.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.